Hello, everyone. This is Jenny at the UKCEH. Just to let you know, we'll just wait a couple of minutes for a few more people to just settle in and then we'll get going. Hello, everyone. This is Jenny at the UKCEH. Just to let you know, we'll just wait a couple of minutes for a few more people to just settle in and then we'll get going. Okay, I'll probably start there. So firstly, hello and welcome to our Nature Up Close webinar of results. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'd like to say a huge thank you. Sorry, muting myself. We'd like to say a huge thank you to all those who took part in this survey, first of all, and the activities that came with it. This year, we know, continues to be incredibly challenging for everyone, which makes your contributions and your feedback even more appreciated and valued. So thank you very much. And whether you were sitting by a patch of flowers doing flower insect timed counts, or whether you were counting and identifying butterflies, or whether you were just taking a step back to just notice nature, we hope you got something out of this too. Tonight, we will be having talks from the team involved at both UKCEH and the University of Derby. So from UKCEH, we have Dr. Michael Pocock and Professor Helen Roy. And from Derby, we have project partners, Professor Miles Richardson and Dr. Ian Hamlin. After they finish talking, there will be a Q&A session, but you can write your questions as you think of them in the live chat at the bottom. I think you need to have a YouTube login to do that. So if you're not comfortable doing that, please just email the natureupclose@ceh.ac.uk and I'll keep an eye on that so we can feed those back as well. Without further ado, I think I will pass over to Michael and he will kick off the whole presentation. So yeah, enjoy.
Thank you so much, Jenny. So you'll need to stop sharing your screen so that I can share mine.
Sorry.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jenny, for that introduction. It's been brilliant to be able to have so many of you involved in this project, Nature Up Close and Personal, during the course of the summer. And I'm going to explain a little bit about the background of the project, where it came from, and the way it worked. So for me, and I suspect for many of you listening, I think nature is wonderful. It's brilliant. It's so good to be able to engage with nature, to watch nature, to record nature in so many different ways. And I think for me, that's exemplified both in beautiful landscapes, going to the coast and climbing mountains, but also to the small, seemingly drab moths that I might see in my garden, or the plants growing in the cracks between the pavement. All of this is truly wonderful, even though we know that nature is so much under threat, especially in Britain. And we know that engagement with nature has been even more important during lockdown. As Jenny said, we've been going through a tremendous year this year, and it's been really difficult for many, many people. And especially earlier on during the period of lockdown, it was remarkable how much engagement with nature was reflected in the media, on radio programs, in newspapers. People were seeming to find solace in nature, and I know that for me personally. And in June, so a couple of months into the lockdown, actually just as restrictions were beginning to be eased, Natural England did a survey, and what they found, a large survey, was that they found that the majority of the public found that, or said that, being in nature made them happy. Many of them said that they've engaged more with everyday nature. And 40% of people said that nature is more important than ever to their well-being during this period of lockdown. And one of the ways in which people engaged with nature was doing recording, so recording wildlife and submitting results. And the picture at the bottom is from an illustration which the Natural History Museum produced based on results which were coming in from the iRecord programme, or iRecord app and website. And so people were able to submit sightings of wildlife. And you can see that there was about a doubling of the number of bats, of butterflies, of moths and of bees that were recorded during the period of lockdown than had been recorded in previous years. So we know that nature is important to our well-being, and that's something that's been established, and Miles will talk about that in a bit. But what we wanted to do during this project was understand is how different types of nature-based activity might affect us differently. And in particular, thinking about citizen science. And so with funding from the Natural Environment Research Council, we set up this project, Nature Up Close and Personal, and it could only have worked thanks to your involvement. And so thank you so much to the over 1,300 people who took part in the project. As Jenny said at the beginning, we're going to go on, once I've described the project, Miles will talk about the importance of nature connectedness. Helen Roy will talk about citizen science, and Ian will give an overview of the results of the study. So we set up this project, as I said, with funding from the Natural Environment Research Council. And what we did was we put the news out there and invited people to participate in this project. And we must thank the British Science Association, who were involved in promoting the project widely to a large number of different people. So thank you so much to the team there. So for those people who signed up, we invited you to do a nature connectedness survey. And as we said, we know that these measures of nature connectedness relate to well-being. Once you did that survey, you were then allocated into a group and asked to do an activity for 5 times over the course of the week. And these groups were randomized. It was a controlled trial. I'll say a bit more about that in just a moment. Once that week was finished, people did a second nature connectedness survey. And then at that point, once we were able to get information on the changes in people's nature connectedness, thanks to that week of activities, we then gave everybody information about all the activities that they could do over the course of the coming months. And then after, well, 6 to 10 weeks later, people were invited to do a third nature connectedness survey, which has just closed now. So thank you to all of you who did get involved in various different ways. Now, we said that this was an experiment. This was a true randomized and controlled trial. So some people were allocated into a group, which is called a waiting list control. The name describes what happens. You simply wait, you do your normal activities, and this provides the comparison for the other activities. So for the other activities, there were 2 types of citizen science. So you could have been allocated into a group recording butterflies using a simple app-based recording, the iRecord Butterflies app. Or you could have been allocated a group doing some more complicated citizen science as part of the UK pollinator monitoring scheme. And these were called the pollinator fit counts for flower insect timed counts. It may have been that you were allocated a group where you were asked to notice nature, and once again for 10 minutes a day to go out, to observe nature, to engage with nature, with wildlife, with plants, and to write down 3 good things. And actually that process of writing and reflecting is really important. And finally, there were 2 other groups, and those were each of the 2 citizen science activities, but where we specifically asked you during your 10 minutes of recording butterflies, or during your 10 minutes of looking out for pollinators, we asked you to also specifically notice nature and write down 3 good things. So we wanted to see if there was added value of doing that. So overall, we were trying to answer this question about how partly to answer the question as to how the well-being benefits of nature-based citizen science compares with some of that more emotional, aesthetic, or even spiritual engagement with nature. And one of the reasons for this is because there isn't actually any evidence about how nature-based citizen science benefits us, or maybe doesn't. And one of the things then is that for people like me who are involved in running and designing citizen science projects, this will help us to be able to think about how we can design better citizen science that not only gathers data, which is a value for scientists, as Helen will say, but also is of even greater value to those people who are participating for their well-being and for their engagement with nature. And so thank you so much to the team of people who were involved in this project. It's been really great to be able to do it. But as I've said, thank you most of all to you who got involved, who participated in this project. We've been able to learn a lot, but maybe more importantly, we hope that during the period of lockdown, and as these restrictions continue into the autumn and the winter, we hope that you've gained additional benefits from engaging with nature and will continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think if you stop sharing your screen, I shall share mine.
There we go.
There we are. So,
whilst Miles is just finding his slides, I would just remind you that you can ask questions at any point during this session. So yeah, please do email or just write in the live chat underneath the YouTube video, and we will get through these at the end. Over to you, Miles. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, so I'm Professor Miles Richardson from the University of Derby, and I look into people's relationship with nature, or nature connectedness, which I'll introduce a little bit more in a moment. You can follow my work on Twitter and on my blog if you're interested in finding out more. So I probably won't need to tell many of you about this, but our relationship with nature, why does it matter? You'll have seen last year the attention on climate warming, which was brought to us by mainly children protesting and telling us about the dangers that come from environmental damage. And then thankfully the loss of wildlife and biodiversity crisis also started to hit the headlines in the past 18 months or so. So that's down to our relationship with nature, the warming climate and the loss of wildlife. But it also matters because of our mental health. Your relationship with nature is a good way to manage your own mental health. And the 61 I will talk in a little bit more detail about, but that is from some work that we've done that gives the mean nature connectedness of the nation last year when we ran some surveys. So I'll put that 61 into context to see whether we think it's high enough or not. So what is nature connectedness? I think the key thing to get across is that it's different to contact with nature and visits to nature and spending time in nature. There's a whole body of research, a very large body of research that shows how being in nature and visiting nature and spending time in nature is good for health and well-being. But nature connectedness is about that relationship, that close relationship with nature. And maybe you might think of it as love for nature. It's an internationally recognized psychological construct. So I'm a psychologist, and we look at this from a psychological perspective. It's a person's sense of their relationship with nature, and that can be an emotional relationship, how much they enjoy nature, the joy and the calm that it brings. But it can also relate to our sense of self and whether we see ourselves as being included in nature and whether nature is part of us or we are part of nature. And as a psychological construct, we can measure it, and it's malleable as well. We can change it. We've developed some of the first interventions that have brought sustained increases to nature connectedness. And there's a growing interest in nature connectedness. It's relatively new. If you go back to 2001, there wasn't a single research article published that mentioned the term nature connectedness, and that's grown exponentially since probably 2012. And now it's recognised to the point where there's a proposal for it to be included in the Gallup World Wellbeing Poll, so that it's an aspect of our psychological well-being. So that's what nature connectedness is. So why does it matter? It matters because it's good for our human well-being. So although it's a relatively new construct, there's been enough studies now, 50 studies involving over 16,000 people, that shows that nature connection relates to both feeling good and functioning well. So feeling good is things like happiness and vitality, and functioning well is feeling that you're living a worthwhile life, or you're satisfied with your life, higher levels of personal growth, or you've got feeling that you've got meaning and purpose in your life. So nature connectedness is associated with those two broad types of well-being. And also other interesting benefits such as increased pro-social behaviour and lower anxiety. So there's a whole host of benefits that have been found from increased levels of nature connectedness. And the good news is it's good for people, but it's good for nature as well. And this is obviously the really important point, is that having a close connection to nature means that people are more likely to get involved with pro-environmental behaviours and pro-nature conservation behaviours as well. And similarly, there was a systematic review last year that came out and found a causal link between nature connectedness and pro-environmental behaviours. So the closer you are to nature, the more likely you are to do good for nature. And it provides a different approach as well. I think many interventions, particularly with children, have been around environmental education and increasing the levels of environmental knowledge to increase pro-nature behaviours. And there's one study in particular that illustrates this kind of different approach that we can take. And they found that when they studied a group of children and they looked at improving their environmental knowledge compared to their nature connectedness and levels of nature connectedness, it was the nature connectedness that explained the children's ecological behaviours. 69% of their ecological behaviours as opposed to 2% based on their knowledge. So it's a very different approach, and lots of organisations are now starting to take that approach. So back to the number 61, working with Natural England, we completed a survey of the population, and we developed a new measure, and we measured nature connectedness on a scale of 0 to 100. 61 was the mean. And so is 61 enough? It's a fair question to ask. When we looked at the mean for people who reported doing nothing for nature or the environment, it was 47. So that's the throwing your can on the ground. You're not too bothered about the natural world. The mean for those was 47. When you looked at more straightforward tasks such as recycling, pretty easy to recycle nowadays, the mean level of nature connectedness is 63. But when you moved to pro-nature conservation behaviours, which requires more commitment from individuals, the mean nature connectedness for them was 76. So you can see that the closer you are to nature, the more you're going to do for nature. So nature connectedness, in a way, the living embodiment of it is noticing nature. And we did some work with the National Trust that was published earlier this year. And we found that 80% of people rarely or never watch wildlife, smell wildflowers. 62% of people said that they rarely or never listen to birdsong or notice butterflies. And we also find that those with high levels of nature connectedness did 50% more than nature. So this concept of noticing nature, which you've heard about and was one of the interventions, is core to nature connectedness and core to our work. And so that was the first intervention that we developed, was around noticing the good things in nature, which some of you who've taken part will have done. And it's the simple task of each day noticing the good things in nature and writing 3 of those good things down. And we found through further research that we've done that can bring clinically significant levels of improvement in mental health in people who do that task, and those benefits last for a month after you did it for a week. So it's quite a powerful approach to managing your mental well-being. And at the minute, we've incorporated that into an app called Go Journal. So that prompts you to notice the good things in nature and has a chat with you about the good things that you notice. And we've also started to develop pathways to nature connectedness so people can design their own activities. I haven't got enough time to go into those, but it's basically 5 different types of activity that you can get involved in to improve your nature connectedness. Using the senses, experiencing emotion and noting your emotions in nature, noticing the beauty of nature, finding meaning and exploring the meaning of nature in your life through art or poetry, for example, celebrating the signs and cycles of nature, and compassion, which is care for nature. And those pathways have been used as part of some studies that you can see there in terms of 30 Days Wild, Durrell are using them, and we've worked with the National Trust to use those as well. So they're the types of things that you can do to improve nature connectedness. So to end from me, just in summary, nature connectedness is important in its own right for well-being and pro-nature behaviours. And so I spoke about the benefits that you can get from visiting nature. What we're finding in research that we've conducted in the past year or so is that visiting nature is good for physical health. And when you add connection and relationship with nature into the model, it's the connection with nature that matters for mental well-being and for pro-nature behaviours. And so we're asking people to create moments to notice nature in their lives, because it's good for nature and good for them. That's all from me. So thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Miles. That's brilliant. I know from my point of view that nature plays a massive role in my life, and it makes me feel so much better, especially at the moment. So now we'll be handing over to Helen Roy, who will be talking about citizen science and wildlife recording. So yeah, over to you, Helen. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And that was really fascinating to hear from Miles and also from Michael, a really exciting summer project. And I'm really excited by citizen science, and that's the way in which we can turn some of the observations that you make through noticing nature into data sets that we can use in so many different ways. And Michael and I are both part of the Biological Records Centre, which is within the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and people have been recording wildlife for centuries. And so we have these vast data sets that span many species all across the country, and we're using them in so many different ways to address so many different questions. And I want to kind of give you a whirlwind tour of some of the ways in which you could get involved going forward, and also you might recognize some of the ways in which you've already been involved already. If I can get my slide to move forward, great. So on this graph here, over to this side, you can see the records coming in over 1 year just into one of our online systems called iRecord. And the map is being filled up by those records that people are submitting, that volunteers are submitting day in, day out for a whole variety of different plants and animals. And you can just see it's just staggering. That's just 1 year of biological recording. And we can see there the invertebrates in blue, so that includes all of the insects, a really high number there. So I should, of course, say that the plants, which are looking a little bit lower, and the vertebrates, so that's all the mammals and the birds, are looking a bit lower there, but their data is coming into other systems as well. So if you added up all of these systems together, you'll see that we do have these really amazingly large data sets, which we can use in so many different ways. Oop, we don't want to watch it again. Let me move to the next slide. Great. So that was 1 whole year of biological recording. Well, when we went into lockdown, for me, it was an opportunity to do something that I've been meaning to do for a long time, and that's to go out into the garden and do some moth trapping. And this is my daughter Ella and my husband David, and we enjoyed a summer of moth trapping. And I would have really struggled had it not been for this app called What's Flying Tonight, which narrowed down the chaos that was in our moth trap into a set of species that I was able to decide which one it was that I was seeing. And so I think some of these technologies can really help us to get involved with citizen science and to submit records, for example, these moth records. I'm a ladybird recorder, so I run the UK Ladybird Survey as a volunteer, and we've got decades and decades of records. And this means that we can do some amazing statistics, some amazing analysis to look at trends over time for these ladybirds. We can see which ones are struggling, which ones are thriving, and are there any things that we can do to improve things for those ones that are struggling. And I won't go through all of these. It is a bit of a depressing story that all of these ones are declining for one way or another. But what's really exciting is if you take a look at that little tiny ladybird right at the top there, if you were to draw a little dot in front of you, that would be the size of that ladybird. That's the dot ladybird with those bright yellow legs and slightly hairy body. And for me, noticing nature, noticing that little ladybird gives me pleasure time and time again. So there's lots of resources out there that you can use if you want to get involved in biological recording. And there are many, many different schemes and societies. There's about 80 schemes and societies. So whatever it is that you might like to start recording, there's almost certainly going to be a group of people who you could work alongside and get to know a little bit more about the creatures or the plants that you will find particularly interesting. These field guides by Richard Lewington, so I just put here the butterflies and the ladybirds, are really fantastic resources, but so are these Field Study Council fold-out charts you can buy for just a few pounds for a whole variety of different plants and animals. And then you can enter your records through iRecord. We have lots of websites for wildlife, and there's lots of smartphone apps, and some of you might have used that butterfly app if you were in that particular group within this project. So you can get even more involved. You can make observations of what you see, where you see it, when you see it, and that's a biological record. But you could also do as these people here are doing, and they're counting the insects that are visiting flowers over a set period of time. And again, some of you might have been involved in doing that over the summer months through this project. And I really hope that maybe next year you might like to carry on doing that, or if you didn't do it this summer, maybe you'll give it a go next summer. It's an incredibly relaxing way to spend 10 minutes just sitting around a small square watching all of the insects that land on the flowers. And we've been running a project for a number of years, the Flower Insect Timed Count, which is part of the UK Pollinator Monitoring Scheme. And you can see on this table, for instance, the data that's been coming in year and year, and the spread of those records across that map. What's really exciting is this year, if you take a look, the number of fit counts submitted in 2019 was 809, whereas this year we're already up to 1,840 fit counts in iRecord. And I'm quite sure some of those were yours, and I'm quite sure the number's going to go up as more people submit their records that they may have been written down on paper somewhere, and we'll get a few more coming in over the winter months. But that's an incredible data set for us, showing these flower insects, the flower visiting insects, are so important in pollination, for instance. And we know what kind of insects people were seeing. And what's really fascinating is you can look at all of the different plants that people chose to count the insects we're visiting, and we get a very different story. So there's something new and something exciting on a daily basis, or even within one afternoon. If you flitted from counting insects visiting dandelions to hogweed, you'd have a very different experience. I did a lot of counting of the insects visiting dandelions, and definitely the average of 4 insects sounds very familiar to me over my 10 minutes. And I did do a couple of counts on hogweed, and it was fantastic to see 24 insects per count coming in. But it's great to see as well that diversity of insects that are using all of those different floral resources. And I've put up the ivy here now as the biggest picture, because there is still the opportunity to take a look at what insects are visiting ivy at the moment. We're not taking in any more data at the moment, so you'll have to wait until next spring to get involved and upload your data. But you can certainly have some good practicing over the next few weeks. So the value of these wildlife observations, when they're all gathered together, well, they can be shared with many, many people to be used in many different ways. And we use them in our research to address quite big ecological questions. For instance, this graph on the left-hand side of the slide showing the widespread losses of pollinating insects in Britain. We use data, volunteer collated data from the Bees, Wasps and Ants Recording Society and the Horrifly Recording Scheme, and produce this really important paper to show that there are these widespread losses, but actually there are some of the pollinating insects that are doing really quite well. And then we can begin to tease out what is it that is good for some and not so good for others, and are there things that we can do within our environment to make it better for those insects that are struggling. Every year we contribute evidence to the government for their UK biodiversity indicators, so they can take a look at what kind of measures they're taking and how that might be improving things for nature, or whether they need to make further changes. We do a lot of work on non-native species, and some of you may have heard of the Asian hornet. And we're asking people to keep a lookout for a whole variety of different species that could arrive and could pose a threat to biodiversity and ecosystems. And the Asian hornet is one of those, and we have an app for people to monitor that species. And many, many people get involved, and that's enabled us so far to ensure that the Asian hornet hasn't yet established in the United Kingdom. So thank you all so much for taking part, and I hope that you've been inspired to carry on with biological recording. It doesn't have to stop now as we head into winter. There's lots of things you can record throughout the winter months, and you can find out more by visiting the BRC website. We've got some pages there about getting started. We've got lots of the apps you can find there too. If you've been really excited by the pollinator monitoring, and I hope you really have, you can do more fit counts next year, or maybe you might like to adopt one of our 1 kilometre squares and get really involved in walking transects and getting to know these pollinating insects even more than the fit counts enables you to do. If you've got any queries at all on these citizen science projects that either you were involved in or you'd like to get involved in, please do contact us on the BRC email address that you can see at the bottom of the slide. But meanwhile, thank you all again for taking part throughout the summer in this exciting project, and I look forward to your data coming in for many other schemes and societies in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Helen. That's brilliant. It's nice to see how one person's record can just contribute to such a larger data set and just have such a big impact. So it's really nice, I think, for people to see. So thank you so much. I'd also just like to jump in here and just remind people that this link will be live after we finish. Well, not live, it will be available after we finish, so you can send this to, you know, people if they're interested in it as well. But now I'd like to introduce Ian Hamlin, who is going to take you through a summary of the results from the survey which you've taken part in. So Ian, I will hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. I'm going to run through quite quickly some of the main findings that we've uncovered so far through analysis of the data that you've submitted. First of all, I'd like to talk a bit about the participants. So we've had 500 people complete both Survey 1 and Survey 2, and that's been a great sample size to get to work on with data analysis. The vast majority of participants have been female, This is what we've come to expect from studies like this, mass participation studies, where we ask the wider population to do nature-based tasks for psychology experiments. We tend to find that women outnumber men on those kinds of studies. The map here has a marker for every participant who took part in the study, and you can see that we do have very good geographical coverage of the whole of the UK, which is great. Now, this is perhaps the most important chart that I'll be presenting. It answers the basic question: did people show improvements in things like nature connectedness, happiness, etc., when they took part in a nature-based activity? So you can see that there are 4 groups of bars, and the first 3 groups of bars relate to participants who did a nature-based task, and the final group of bars relates to participants who did no activity at all. And the bars themselves represent increases in nature connectedness, in green, increases in happiness, in orange, increases in life satisfaction in yellow, and increases in conservation behavior in blue. And you can see by eyeballing the chart that the first 3 sets of bars are bigger than the last set of bars, i.e. people who did a nature-based task improved more across the 8 days of taking part in the study than people who did no activity at all. And this is what we expected to find, what we hoped to find, what we expected to find. And we also expected that if participants took part in 2 activities, i.e. if they took part in both a citizen science task and a noticing nature task, that they might improve even more than people who do just one activity. But this is not what we found. Just by looking at the bars, you can tell the first 3 sets of bars don't vary that much from each other. And when we do the statistics on the data, we find that the first 3 sets of bars don't differ statistically significantly from each other, i.e. any difference between the first 3 sets of bars may simply be down to random chance rather than any meaningful difference between the activities. So whichever activity participants took part in, they tended to improve just about as much. Now, this chart breaks down the citizen science condition by activity. So you've got one set of bars representing the improvements experienced by participants who took part in the butterfly ID activity, and the second set of bars represents improvements experienced by participants who took part in the insect flower timed count activity. And the bars are pretty much of similar heights. And again, when we did statistics in the data, we found that these 2 types of task didn't differ significantly in statistical terms, in terms of the improvements that participants showed. So regardless of which citizen science task participants did, they tended to benefit just about as much. We've also had a look at which other factors might benefit people. Perhaps the older people are, or the younger they are, the more benefit they might derive from taking part in a nature-based activity. Maybe one gender benefits more than the other. Latitude might be available. As you move further south in the UK, generally speaking, you find more biodiversity, so perhaps people who take part in a nature-based task further south derive more benefit from nature. We didn't know. Similarly, it's not unreasonable to expect that the more times you do the activity and the more engaged you are in the activity, the more benefit you get from it. But that's not what we found. We found that none of these variables actually influence the benefit that people derived from taking part in a nature-based task. So it's a bit surprising, but reassuring that it doesn't matter what age you are, or what gender you are, or where you live in the country, you derive roughly similar benefit from taking part in citizen science and other activities that involve connecting with nature. And it's also interesting to note that you only need to do a little bit of engaging with nature or a little bit of citizen science, and you derive significant benefit from that psychologically. So a summary of the main findings that we found are that participants who took part in a nature-based task improved significantly their connection to nature, their happiness, their life satisfaction, and the amount of pro-nature conservation behaviour that they exhibit. And it doesn't matter what nature-based task you did, you tended to experience very similar levels of improvement on these variables. So that was a very brief summary of the results so far.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ian. It's nice to see what has happened from everyone's input into this survey. So it goes to show that actually having a reason to kind of connect to nature actually does have some sort of benefit to you, which is really nice to know, and hopefully can get more people involved in some citizen science perhaps. So that's a good thing. I'm just going to share my screen, so I'll take it to the Q&A session now. So we've had quite a few questions come in, which is good news. I will get through as many of them as I can, so we'll be around for about 5 or 10 more minutes. So yeah, bear with me as I just sort of go through all the questions. Okay, so one of the questions is, how were the majority of participants recruited, and did they tend to already have a strong interest in nature? Now, I probably can answer a bit of that. So we sent it out to various people. So the British Science Association put it out to numerous networks. So we got feedback from quite a few people. I would say probably more interested in nature, but I will pass over to either probably Ian or Michael to finish on that one.
Ian, do you want to talk about the results?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this was something that we were going to look at. The results so far are kind of initial results, the main findings, but this is a question that I can't remember if we have done an analysis of the level of nature connectedness of participants, because we have norms for how connected to nature people generally are in the population, and we can compare the norms with the mean from our sample. But if we have looked at it, I can't remember what it is, but this is certainly something that we'll be writing up in a report. But off the top of my head, I can't remember how our participants compared to your average population member in terms of connection to nature.
But from my looking at the results, Ian, not rather than formal analysis, which is clearly important, but simply from looking at them, it did look like people who were taking part tended to have quite high nature connectedness already. And I think as you've said to me in the past, those people benefited. Those people who had lower nature connectedness actually benefited more from taking part. So it's not surprising that a project which was about engaging with nature attracted people who were interested in nature. But I think the really exciting thing, maybe as Miles touched on, would be those opportunities for engaging, reaching out to people who aren't yet so engaged with nature, because the benefits that they could get, or maybe the benefits that they're missing out on, are so great. Yeah, such potential there.
Okay, thank you. So we've had another question aimed at Michael, but I think this can be answered by various people. So it's, Michael, you said in your presentation that writing down 3 things that you noticed in nature was important. What is it about the actual writing it down that makes it important? Now I'm offering that field back to Derby as well, because I know that they have a lot to do with the noticing nature. So I'll yeah.
The reason I said that, Jenny, was because Miles told me that. So I'm going to hand over. I'm going to hand over to him, and he can explain.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's evidence from other areas of psychology that writing is a powerful thing to do, and that can be long forms of writing, and obviously that doesn't make for a nice simple intervention. And when I started developing the 3 good things in nature, I adapted a positive psychology intervention, which is basically 3 good things, and that's been around for a little while, and it just involves writing 3 sentences about the good things in your life. And it's interesting, when you look at those studies, people very rarely write about nature. They write about their jobs and their friends. And so we put that very simple twist on in nature. And when you know that you've got to write 3 things down at the end of the day, is how we originally did it, it impacts you through the day. You're engaged with that task, and if you're waiting for the bus or wandering to work or taking a break or looking out the window, you will be thinking about your good thing, because you know you've got to write it down and formulating which are going to be your 3 good things. And then the actual process, the cognitive process of writing, is another form of thinking, and it kind of embeds that experience into your mind and your thinking more than if you just thought of them and then it kind of disappeared. It provides that kind of scaffold and structure, if you like, for it to be a meaningful act.
Okay. We've had another question about whether education should be driven away from ecological content and models and theories and pushed more towards connectedness work, like the John Muir Award at Pre16. It's a long time since I've done education, so I don't know what that is, but should we be tending more to connectedness rather than the theories? I'll give that to Michael. I'll see if Michael has
Yeah, I think it's very much a sense of both and I think within education it can be really easy to end up focusing more and more on the knowledge and the theories, but clearly that engagement, that connection with nature seems to be so important, as Miles talked about, as Ian talked about, from the results that all of you listening contributed to. A small amount of connection with nature seems to be so important. So that's clearly something vital. But, and I'll ask Helen to reflect in just a moment as well, I certainly think that knowing something about the things that you're looking at has great potential to enhance your connection with those species, with those individuals, whatever they are. Helen, would you like to say any more?
Yeah, no, I do completely agree with you. And I think so. I got my PhD was on insects, and that was 25 years ago. So I've been studying insects for decades. But doing this moth trapping through the summer months, holding a little moth on my hand and just looking at its little face and seeing just the beauty of it. There's a little moth called the spectacled moth, and it literally has little spectacles. And that to me was just a aesthetically joyful thing to be doing every morning. However, just as Michael is describing, I love the stories that they have to tell as well. And I wouldn't know about those stories if I didn't look into some of that ecological theory. And that doesn't mean to say you have to study insects, as I have done for decades and decades, to know those stories. You can find out about those so easily now. And I just think that adds to the richness of the whole experience. And certainly for me, just losing myself in nature is tremendously good for my own well-being.
Absolutely. We have reached sort of 10 to 8, so I'll go for like one more question and then we'll sort of bring it to a close. But there's actually one question that I can answer, which is, are we planning to send all participants a summary of what is being presented here? And firstly, again, this link will be available so you can watch the whole thing again, but also we will be sending an email to you in the next couple of days, and there's a sort of opt-in for you to receive a report or any material published from this, and also to be part of any potential future associated studies. So there's another question about similar studies going forward. So yes, if you would like to be involved, we would love for you to be involved, and if you would like to see what we've written and published, then yes, absolutely, please, we will contact you with this information. So yes, I would encourage people who have sent questions and we haven't had time to answer, please email them to us. and I will forward them on to the team, and we can try and answer you in time. So yeah, please do that. But yeah, so overall, I think it's been really nice to actually share this information with you and get you to see what you're contributing to, because it's really interesting for us, and it must be nice for you to get something out of it too. So we're really pleased that you could join us this evening, and we hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to say thank you to Michael, Helen, Miles and Ian for their time and their contribution. And yeah, hopefully you can use citizen science going forward to benefit yourself and also just to benefit the wider science as well. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your time this evening. And I will draw it to a close there. Right.